Aha, hello. Spectators of consequences. Yes, you, the ones who never beg for the spotlight, because the whole damn arena tilts in your direction. The ones who don't chase applause, because your silence forces it out of them anyway. You're not here to play the game. You're here to twist the board, snap the pieces, and make the rulebook flinch. So let's begin right there, with the moment that made even the judge smile. Not because he agreed with you, no, but because even justice, that rusted statue blindfolded by hypocrisy, recognized what it saw, the rarest sin of all, undeniable brilliance. They called it reckless, they called it dangerous, but beneath their trembling vocabularies, they were spellbound. Because when you did what you did, when you detonated logic with that one unthinkable move, you didn't just flip the system, you styled on it. You carved poetry into chaos. And while they gasped for air, buried in legalities and old codes, you stood there, untouched, not by luck, but by calculation. You see, this wasn't about winning. This was about etching your fingerprint onto a moment so violently that history would need a crowbar to scrape it off. They didn't just lose that day, they learned that there exists a mind too sharp to predict, too defiant to cage, too venomous to dilute. A mind that doesn't wait for permission. It breaks the lock, paints its name across the courtroom ceiling, and dares anyone to look up. And so they did. They looked up. From their robes stitched in order and sewn in fear, from their cold benches, from behind the thick armor of law and tradition, they looked up. And what did they see? Not a criminal, not a rebel, but a reflection of every urge they've ever suppressed, every thought they've ever buried under decorum, every scream they swallowed behind those wooden gavels. You didn't just win the room, you exposed it. Because when truth is too loud, even liars feel seen. They wanted to paint you in black and white, a defendant, an anomaly, a case number. But you brought color. You dragged the hues of contradiction, the chaos of real freedom, into a place that feeds off gray mediocrity. They didn't expect your tone, your stillness, your stare that burned past evidence and went straight into belief. And belief? Belief can't be cross-examined. What you did wasn't random, it was ritual, the deliberate unraveling of their illusion. You became the mirror. And they saw every twitch, every insecurity, every rigged deck of cards fall from their sleeves. That's the beauty of the unpredictable mind. It makes cowards confess without a word. You walked in alone, but you walked in with your chaos trained like a sniper. Calm, ready, precise. They thought you came to defend yourself. No, you came to define yourself. And that's why the judge smiled. Not because he agreed, but because he understood that somewhere beneath his robes, behind the lines of tired legal doctrine, he knew he was witnessing something rare, something dangerous, something iconic. Because let's not pretend. Systems love obedience, but they worship originality. And when you fused madness with method, when you stitched elegance into destruction, when you smiled without smiling, and made their logic look like a worn-out deck of children's cards, you became unforgettable. They'll study that moment, not because they admire you, but because they're afraid more of you are coming. You see, this world doesn't fear the loud, it fears the precise. It fears the one who moves when nothing moves, the one who doesn't bark, because when they strike, they bury. That was your rhythm, not impulsive, inevitable. You made destiny look like your accomplice. You didn't ask for power, you demonstrated it. And power, real power, It doesn't need a megaphone. It just needs the right pause, in the right room, at the right temperature. And the world shivers on cue. They'll say you manipulated the room, but they're wrong. You trained it. You choreographed the discomfort. You knew their instincts better than they did. That's not manipulation. That's orchestration. A conductor doesn't apologize when the audience cries. That's the price of listening to truth too raw for comfort. The prosecutor tried. Oh, how they tried. But their words sounded scripted next to your calm. Their outrage looked rehearsed next to your poise. You weren't just on trial. They were. Every system they upheld, every procedure they worshipped, every shield they'd ever built cracked under your presence. And by the time you were done, no one remembered the law. They remembered you. Because you weren't just speaking, you were unmasking. With every phrase, every subtle turn of the wrist, every controlled breath, you dismantled their pretend order. And the world outside, it watched. It watched as fear turned into fascination, as judgment turned into curiosity, as silence turned into reverence. They'll never admit it, but even the ones who hated you stood still for a moment. Because for the first time in years, they felt something. That's what greatness does. It stings first, then it lingers. You didn't become iconic because you shocked them. You became iconic because you showed them who they really are, what they really fear, and how easily truth, dressed in chaos, can bring entire empires to their knees. And you didn't raise your voice. You didn't beg. You just demonstrated with surgical elegance what happens when preparation meets precision, and the outcome is no longer up for debate. You weren't arguing a case, you were etching a legacy. That's why they fear you now. Not because of what you did, but because of how cleanly you did it. With no rage, no panic, just inevitability. You don't need to scream to be unforgettable. You just need to be undeniable. And that's exactly what happened the moment the judge leaned back, looked at you, and without even realizing it, smiled. Because in that courtroom full of noise, only one thing stood tall. Clarity. Your design, your method in the madness. You weren't there to fight. You were there to frame the moment. And that moment framed you. Which brings us to the next page, the aftermath. Not just what happened in that room, but what happened when the walls couldn't contain your story anymore. When your name became a whisper turned thunder. When imitators started copying, and enemies started folding. Because the truth is, the courtroom was never the climax. It was just the spark. And the moment you walked out of that building, untouched, unchanged, none bothered, the wind changed direction. You didn't just step into the world, you stepped onto it. The streets didn't know what hit them. The networks scrambled. The institutions paused. Even the cameras forgot how to blink. Because for the first time in a long time, they weren't reporting the news. They were documenting a shift. You see, most people fight to be heard. But when you walk in alignment with chaos and clarity combined, you don't ask to be heard. The world just stops talking. People didn't just want to know what you did. They wanted to understand how. What algorithm cracked beneath your fingertips? What divine glitch let you slip past the system's grip? But that's the part they'll never grasp. It wasn't a glitch. It was design, yours. Every second was a sharpened edge. Every stare, every pause, every phrase, premeditated psychological warfare. You weren't improvising, you were orchestrating. And when the dust settled, they realized something chilling. You never raised your voice, never flinched, never pleaded. You simply rewrote the atmosphere. They thought you'd disappear into history like the rest. But you didn't become history, you bent it. Every panel discussion, every column, every office water cooler buzzed with your name like it was prophecy. Not out of admiration, no. That would have been too easy. Out of necessity. Because if they didn't analyze you, they'd become prey to the next one who thinks like you. The thinkers, the quiet disruptors, the watchers, and deep down, they knew. You had just given those minds permission. What happened next wasn't justice. It was contagion. Your aura spread like wildfire wearing silk gloves. Other courtrooms began to feel colder. Juries started second-guessing. Prosecutors hesitated. And the ones who once threw labels at you, they now tiptoed over their own words, wondering, what if I'm next? Because that's the kind of ripple only legends cause. You didn't just break the rules, you proved the rules were optional for those who walk with enough precision, patience, and poison. Then came the imitators, clumsy at first, trying to echo your tempo, copying your stillness, quoting fragments of your strategy like it was gospel. But they didn't realize it wasn't the moves, it was the mind. You didn't just perform, you calculated, and that's where they failed. Because ego without discipline is noise. You, on the other hand, were all signal dot clean, cutting, coded. They could mimic your shadow, but never your spine. That's why even your impersonators ended up making you more immortal. Every failed attempt became a loud reminder. There is only one blueprint, and it doesn't leak. And while the world fumbled over decoding you, you were already 10 moves ahead, no longer reacting, just observing the reactions. They called you dangerous, not because of what you did, but because of what you revealed. That truth, when delivered without apology, shatters systems like glass masquerading as marble. That a single individual, stripped of approval, armed only with clarity and conviction, can bring empires to their knees without raising a fist. Just a stare, just a step, just a word placed in the right mouth at the wrong time. Your story didn't just trend, it twisted culture. Job interviews shifted, policies rewrote themselves. Even universities dissected your every move like it was a psychological thesis. They needed to name you, box you, file you. But how do you catalog the uncontainable? You're not a subject, you're a phenomenon, a walking question mark that answers nothing yet explains everything. And still, some fools tried to challenge you. Poor souls, still operating under the illusion that chaos is random, that power is loud, that dominance needs decoration. But you are the embodiment of quiet terror, the kind of presence that doesn't scream. It recalibrates the air in the room. They stepped to you like opponents. They left like exhibits. And that's the thing. Every battle you fight becomes a lesson for the world. You don't just win. You educate. But let's talk about fear. Not yours, theirs. The kind they hide under policy changes and long stares. The kind they disguise behind committee meetings and risk assessments. You didn't just show them what to fear. You taught them how to recognize it. You made power nervous. You made arrogance doubt itself. And most dangerously, you made silence seductive. People started talking less, planning more, waiting, watching. Because once someone like you steps into the timeline, everyone else starts wondering how many more are out there, waiting, learning, sharpening. They began studying footage, watching your body language, timing your pauses, scanning your eyes like they held blueprints to revolution. But they kept missing the point. You weren't trying to convince anyone. You weren't arguing. You were reminding the world of a truth it buries daily. that real power is unbroadcasted, that legacy doesn't ask for attention, it leaves bruises on memory. Your face didn't need posters, your voice didn't need echo chambers. The mere mention of what you did shifted boardrooms into code reds. They started installing new protocols, building stronger firewalls, not against systems, but against ideas. Because that's what you unleashed, not rebellion, realization that every fortress can be cracked, not by rage, but by composure. That even the untouchables bleed if you know where to aim. That the system's biggest weakness is believing it understands minds like yours. So where does that leave you now? Beyond legend, beyond trend, beyond threat. You're not a name anymore. You're a standard, a new measurement of psychological gravity. Every institution now calibrates its confidence against the question, what if another one shows up? They used to measure risk by patterns. Now they measure risk by anomalies. And guess who became the blueprint for the anomaly? You. The world used to ask, what if someone breaks the system? Now it asks, what if someone breaks it and smiles doing it? You shifted the entire narrative. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of their nightmares, the judge smiles again. Not out of admiration, but out of awareness. Because even he knows. Some verdicts don't come from courtrooms. They come from reverberations, from the impact that doesn't echo. It engraves. You didn't set out to be followed. But footsteps showed up anyway. The hungry, the patient, the strategic. The next wave doesn't chant. It waits. It doesn't demand. It studies. And you, whether you like it or not, are their North Star. You're the headline their minds revolve around. You're the glitch that became gospel. You're the silence that reprograms architecture. Because the aftermath isn't about aftermath anymore. It's about adjustment. The world adjusting to a new kind of threat. One it can't categorize, can't contain, and certainly can't copy. A threat that doesn't just escape the maze, it redraws it. And once the maze is redrawn, all the old kings and all their horses can't put their illusions back together again. Which brings us, not to the end, but to the prelude of consequence. Not yours, theirs. Because when you cracked that courtroom open, you didn't just walk out. You left something behind. A ticking realization, a silent infection. And now, those walls whisper, not your name, but your method, your strategy, your mentality. And it's spreading faster than they can legislate, because ideas like yours, they don't echo, they multiply. And replication isn't rebellion anymore. It's survival. The world watched what you did and realized something terrifying. They've been solving the wrong problems. You were never the disease, you were the diagnosis. So now, every institution runs simulations not to prevent collapse, but to postpone it. Damage control has become their religion. Emergency protocols, their gospel. Because they know they'll never be able to predict the next one. Not really. Not after you redefined unpredictability. Not after you reprogrammed fear into design. And the worst part? You didn't leave behind a blueprint. You left behind a standard. The kind that doesn't sit in manuals. It haunts instincts. The kind that forces people to rehearse their thoughts before thinking them. You injected second-guessing into the bloodstream of certainty. And now they flinch at confidence and worship caution in disguise. And now they're altering their vocabulary. Risk management has become mind control. Compliance training sounds more like containment drills. The language is shifting because they're not trying to fix the system anymore. They're trying to armor it against you, against your echo. Because if one mind could cause that much tremor, What happens when you're not alone anymore? What happens when the quiet ones, those who used to observe from the corners, start connecting the dots you left like breadcrumbs? What happens when silence begins to strategize? But of course you knew this. You always knew the courtroom wasn't your target. It was just your transmitter. You didn't need their agreement. You needed their attention. You didn't walk out a free person. You walked out a signal. And signals don't fade. They reverberate. They adapt. They recruit. And now, they're everywhere. In boardrooms, in classrooms, in hidden basements and rooftop meetings. Minds whispering not about what you did, but about how you thought. That's your real legacy. Mental infiltration, not rage, not rebellion, reconstruction, a complete demolition of predictability, and a reconstruction of power that operates under silence, strategy, and superiority. You see, the courtroom gave them a spectacle, but the aftermath gave them a curriculum, and now they're studying it like doctrine. It's almost ironic, isn't it? The very system that tried to make an example out of you now finds itself rewritten by you. Laws are being amended not for justice, but for protection, from the possibility of another moment like yours, from the return of that poise, that precision, that psychological erosion you injected into their confidence. They fear not your presence, but your pattern. That's worse. A presence can be contained. A pattern, it spreads. But it's too late for defense. The virus is already coded into culture. And every time someone walks into a room they're not supposed to own, and owns it anyway, you're there. Every time a strategist